Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Campus Lisa webinar series. My name is Angie Liu. I'm a project manager with Information Technology Services, and I will be your show host for the hour. Before I introduce our session for the day, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. The session is being recorded. It will be available to view on campuslisa.ucsc.edu. The presentation will be about an hour long with some time at the end for Q&A. Please use the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout the webinar, as chat will be disabled. You can also comment and upvote other people's questions. Our session today is Pandemics, Protests, and Personal Data, Privacy in 2020. Our speaker is Pegah Parsi, the Campus Privacy Officer. Let's all give a warm virtual welcome to Pegah.
Thank you, Angie. Hello, everyone. My name is Pegah Parsi, and I'm the Campus Privacy Officer. Let me share my screen with you, and we'll get started. I'm so glad that you all are all here with me today. Many of you have already been to some of my workshops, so the first few slides will be review for you. For the rest of you, this is just a quick explanation of what we're talking about when we're talking about privacy. At any point, feel free to stop and ask a question. Angie will help me to moderate those sorts of things. But don't be shy. I would like to have an interactive session if we can, and talk about some of the things that you all are seeing out in the world. It's certainly been a very, very strange year, and nothing has been left untouched, and the same is true of privacy and personal data use. So I thought this session would just be a space for all of us to talk about all of the things that have happened this year and how they might impact your privacy, either for yourself or as part of your job. So let's get started. I like to start every session that I do with a review of what we're talking about when we're talking about privacy. As you all know, I say this all the time, privacy is not just confidentiality. It is not just about secrecy. What we're talking about when we are talking about privacy is the ability to exercise control over yourself, to have autonomy, to understand decisions that are happening to oneself. That includes your bodily privacy, your stuff, your space, things around you, your communications, your phone calls and your emails. And of course, the new hot topic of the day, personal data. All of the data that are collected about you in a variety of different ways. We want to be able to exercise some control, or at least have good, transparent understanding of what it is that happens to our data and what decisions are made using our data. So that's sort of the start of our conversation. Then the next thing I like to talk about is, what do we mean when we mean personal data? when we are talking about personal data, we are not just talking about direct identifiers. Direct identifiers being things that are just mine, things like my name or my social security number. Those certainly are personal data, but that's not all we're talking about. What we are talking about when we use the general phrase personal data or personal information is any data related to a person. Any data related to a person. That can be real mundane stuff. It could be demographics. It could be my interests. It could be my behavior, my location. Even things like my device ID, my IP address. Those all are considered personal data because, as you can see from this graphic here, you can take all of these little bits of information about me or about yourself and create a pretty decent profile of a person. And of course, personal data can certainly be used to do all kinds of good in society. There are lots of benefits to be gleaned from what we can understand from data. However, we want to be careful because personal data can and often are used to monitor us, to surveil us, to target us for various things like targeted advertising. But it can also be used even more nefariously for things like manipulation or to defraud us. So there's, personal data are neither good nor bad. It's just how they're used and by whom. So that's why we need to have certain types of protections around them. And of course, the personal data that we're talking about comes from all sorts of sources. Those of you that have been to my Privacy 101 workshop are familiar with this graphic. I like to talk about this for a little while, but I put it up here as a reminder. We are all putting out little bits of information about ourselves all the time, all day, every day. And all that is collected in a variety of different places. This particular graphic is just stuff that happens on the internet every 60 seconds. This is an old graphic, by the way. A new updated one is just vastly more information. It shows vastly more information that is collected from all of us. Of course, this is just stuff that happens online. There are lots of other ways that we are all putting out information about ourselves, whether that is through our IoTs, our smart vacuums, our Ring doorbells. All of those sorts of things are collecting little bits of information about us. Our use of Canvas, for example, our use of Slack, all of the workplace technology tools that we use are collecting little bits of information about us. So that's just one way of framing what we're going to be talking about today. So all of these, of course, are then fed into this mess of marketing web. Marketing and data use web that is very, very complicated. It's such a complex ecosystem. And again, this one's also old. It's a complex ecosystem of people and entities that are wheeling and dealing in your information without your knowledge. I would bet that looking at this list, if you're even able to see most of it, we are not familiar with most of these companies that are buying and selling our information, whether they're data brokers, data aggregators, what have you. And then, of course, using that to either market certain messages to us or target us for misinformation. So the landscape, like I said before, is very complex, and it is, at the moment anyway, incumbent on us to educate ourselves about what is happening to our personal data. Otherwise, lots of things are happening to us without our knowledge. And so we lose that autonomy, we lose that level of control that we like to have about the rest of our things. So let's move on. I know many of you that know me know I'm very, very passionate about this particular topic, and that's why I do what I do. But I also understand privacy is not the end-all be-all of everything. Privacy, as most things, has to be balanced against all the other societal values that we have, whether it's public health, as we're seeing right now, or things like national security, or student success, student health, achievement, those sorts of things. We have to balance all of those, and that's what we do here at our university as well. However, what I do see is that when an emergency comes up, particularly a large one like a pandemic or a global crisis, people tend to go into a all or nothing mode. You either have privacy or it goes completely out the window. That's not what needs to happen. In times of emergency, privacy does not wholesale go out the window. In fact, that's very, very dangerous, and we don't want to do that. What we want to do is make sure that we're balancing privacy needs with the other things that are coming up. So again, some of you have heard me say this, many in the privacy profession would compare what's happening right now during the pandemic to what happened immediately following 9/11. So after 9/11, because it was a national emergency, several laws were passed in quick succession and without much social discussion. So the Patriot Act, for example, was passed at that time. And many would argue that was a good law when it was passed. This is not a political statement. I don't care what anybody thinks about the Patriot Act. The point that I'm trying to make is that it didn't end when it needed to. So it kind of kept going after the emergency. It just kept getting extended, and we forgot about it. Many of us forgot about it until one day we had the Edward Snowden revelations, and everyone said, oh my goodness, what are we doing? Why is this law in place still? So the point I'm trying to make is we have a national emergency. We do what we need to do. We make sure we're not throwing privacy completely out the window. There needs to be some balance in those situations. So right now, at the time of the pandemic, what you are seeing is a lot of people trying to do a lot of things with personal data for a lot of good. And it may be completely necessary, and you will see here, I have many of the efforts to curb the pandemic do rely on personal data. We absolutely need to use personal data to meet the challenges that we're facing in this day and age. And that includes things like, of course, your health information, your positive tests, your screenings, and those sorts of things, but also a lot of other things about society, right? How are people behaving? How do we influence their behavior? What sorts of things in your lifestyle might make you more susceptible, less susceptible? And of course, things like location information to do things like contact tracing or exposure notification. So, the point here being that we have an emergency, we have a need for personal data, but that does not mean that we put in place programs that then extend beyond the emergency and continue to become the norm, and that we continue to collect information and use it and process it in ways that were never intended or even necessary for the emergency. And of course, we're talking about all of the things that have happened this year, and the pandemic, of course, was the first one, but then we had an entire national, international conversation around police practices, and that led to protests. So police practices, just like pandemic efforts, also rely very heavily on use of personal data in a variety of different ways. So what we usually think of is things like security cameras, of course, but the police, law enforcement uses a lot of other sources of personal data to do what they do. That includes things like predictive analytics, predictive policing, using information that they can collect from industry, for example, from Amazon or from 23andMe. You may have been familiar with the case where there was a mass murderer from, I believe it was the 70s. He was tracked down finally by use of DNA from his extended family. So law enforcement's use of data from various other places where that information is collected has also come under great scrutiny this year. So that's something we want to talk about. I should have changed the title of this and also added another bullet point here, because what we're talking about this year is not only pandemics and police practices and protests, but also politics, of course, right? It's an election year, and you're hearing a lot about fake news and misinformation and election advertising and those sorts of things. So we're going to touch on that briefly as well. But like I said, I do want this to be at least somewhat interactive. So if you have other thoughts about whatever you've seen this year, let's talk about those. So let's start with COVID-19. You all remember way back in the day in March when we all of a sudden went remote. So it was, I think, March 13th or something, 2 days before we started our final exams for the quarter, and just everything broke loose, and my office got involved in the usual ways that you might think of. So on day one, of course, I had to think about what kind of information can we share with things like the county public health agencies, with the CDC, with student health, with parents, with spouses. Are those things that we can or can't share? What sorts of information do we need to report in individualized ways? What do we need to aggregate? What do we need to not report at all? So those were sort of early questions that we had. And of course, we had to figure out what can and can't we ask people. Is it okay to ask if someone has been around someone with COVID? Is it not okay? And of course, these questions continue on. This is an evolving landscape, but I'm just giving you a taste of what my last 6 months have been like. And of course, like I said, we were 2 days before final exams started, and so immediately moving everything online brought up a lot of questions around how do I do an online exam. Of course, anything that you do online, there's little bits of information that are collected about your students. And the very next question was, what do I do about proctoring? Can I record my students? Can I have them record themselves? Who can watch this? Can we use a proctoring service, et cetera, et cetera? So that was one instance, by the way, where we had to do a lot of balancing, right? We want to make sure that academic integrity, that is a value that we have at our university. We want to make sure that that is something that's preserved, but also we want to make sure that privacy is preserved. So we sort of did a little bit of a compromise and came up with some solutions, though of course nothing is perfect either for academic integrity or for privacy, but it was what we could do in the short period of time that we had. Then we had day 2 stuff. You all were part of this conversation. What about Zoom? What's Zoom security like? Is Zoom secretly monitoring my chats? Is it transferring data through servers in China? Can we record things? All of those questions started very early on. Of course, people said, why are we using Zoom at all? Why don't we use this other thing? Can I use this newfangled thing that I found on my own? Those questions came up, and to a certain extent, they continue to come up. So, of course, this is something that we continue to deal with. How do we move everything online? How do we do advising online? How do we do our work online? This question, again, comes up. What sort of free tools can I use to collaborate with my colleagues? And not to open this can of worms at all with you all, but something like, can I use a free version of Slack? Is that privacy protective? Or is it only the enterprise one that is privacy protective? Those are questions that are excellent questions, and we should talk about them. Anytime that you want to use a free version of something, please just ping me. I'll let you know if I need to do a review or not, or if there are particular things that you need to consider in order to make it more privacy protective. Certainly, student health and counseling were big issues that we had to think about. How do we do counseling online? Is it okay? There are lots of rules and regulations around, having those sorts of sensitive conversations in an online environment. So then we moved on to day 3 when things had sort of settled to the extent that anything has settled this year. Day 3, we had everyone, of course, wanting to do analytics. Can we see how engaged our students are with Canvas? Can we take a look to see if students are sort of falling off in the middle of the quarter and not engaging as much? Can we see if our employee productivity is up? By the way, I should point out that these are not specific to UC San Diego. Most of these types of questions have been going on at every type of organization and nationally, right? We're seeing a lot of news articles about these. We're seeing lots of other types of industries struggling with exactly these sorts of things. So please don't think that this is specific to us. Everybody else is doing the same thing. To take a look at the big data that we have on our hands now, with everything having moved online. And with everything having moved online and people now working or studying from every part of the world, we have changed legal risks. Where, for example, those of you that are familiar with the GDPR, the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, applies to us when we are dealing with someone that is physically located in the European Union. When all of a sudden we go remote and many of our students go back to the European Union, and including some of our employees that are EU residents went back to the European Union, all of a sudden the number of things that were subject to this regulation went up, right? So changed legal risks, and mind you, the European Union is not the only one. Brazil just passed a new data protection law. UK has a pretty stringent one. Many different countries have their own privacy laws. So changed legal risks were things that I've had to contend with this year as well. So then things sort of settled down for maybe about 7 hours, and then we started talking about campus reopening. This will not come as a surprise to you all, but every single one of the things that we are doing involves personal data to some extent, whether it is asking you about your symptoms every day that you are going to be present, to offering you free asymptomatic testing, whether or not you can come and go in the building. Some buildings have key card access, some don't. Is it okay to have a piece of paper? Do we do temperature checks? What do we do? How do we allow people into or out of a building? All of those things involve collecting or processing your personal information to some extent or other. And of course, contact tracing and case investigations are the big hot topic in public health these days. And of course, in privacy circles, as you know, case investigation and contact tracing involve if somebody either tests positive or has been around someone, a close contact that has tested positive, then case investigators and contact tracers will talk to them and find out where they have been during the time that they may have been shedding the virus. So that involves asking you all of the places you've been the last 2 weeks or so, who you've been around. You can imagine how sensitive that can get. Certainly, many of us tend to fall into that category of saying, meh, who cares? I don't do anything interesting. I'm not around anyone but my family. Who cares? But that's not the way we should be thinking about this, right? We should be thinking about this, about what sort of information is now known and put in a database about us. And in fact, around contact tracing, we saw a lot of concern from marginalized communities. We saw a lot of concern from, for example, our DACA community. Our DACA community was saying, if you're going to put in a database all of the people that I'm in contact with over a 2-week period, you're probably going to capture other people that are undocumented and put them potentially at risk. Of course, their questions were addressed and their concerns were addressed, but that was something that we had to think about to make sure we had really strong protections in place when contact tracers are asking those sorts of sensitive questions. You can also imagine the same thing for the LGBTQIA community. If you're asking them, tell me everyone you've been around, tell me everything you've done for 2 weeks. So these sorts of things can be sensitive for people for a variety of different reasons, and not just marginalized people, by the way. I think this is an issue for everyone. So it's important to ask questions and find out what sort of privacy safeguards are in place for any sort of initiative that comes up. And of course, you will have seen the messages coming out about the exposure notification program that will be launching shortly. So that's something that governments can offer. And right now, many are looking at Google and Apple's program to let you know, based on your phone's Bluetooth signal, your phone's Bluetooth signal will say you've been close to someone for, let's say, like, for example, 15 minutes, and then that person tests positive for COVID, then your phone will say, hey, you've been exposed to COVID from someone. It won't say who, but it'll say from someone, and you may need to contact, either get tested or call your doctor or whatever you need to do. Again, you can completely see where that would lead people to have questions and concerns around their personal data. Again, that's why people like me exist. Roles like me exist. Roles like the privacy officer. I exist for a great many reasons, not just this one. And of course, things like isolation housing. How do we notify someone that they need to be isolated? How do we make sure we do that in a privacy protective way? We don't need to out everyone that is COVID positive. But we do need, again, to balance that need with the need to protect the rest of our community. So this is sort of what's been happening, at least on our campus and across the country for many people. And with this happening, we've seen a lot of news articles about this. So this one talks about all the big data dashboards that most colleges and universities are putting into place to help, right? We have a lot of information that we're collecting, whether, again, it's through our use of Canvas, through our use of our website. We're collecting information from people, and colleges want to use that to keep everyone safe. Of course, that leads to the question of, are we just putting in place a mechanism for mass surveillance in the future? Recall what we were talking about just a couple of slides ago. That was about how long do we put these sorts of surveillance programs in place? How long do we keep these dashboards in place that monitor our students, our employees, our staff, everybody? And is it going to then become normalized and we become used to it and then it just remains in place forever, such that all of my activities are being tracked and pushed into some sort of big data dashboard well after the pandemic is over? That's a significant concern that we need to think about. And there are some universities that even went beyond this. You all might recall Syracuse University was requiring all of their students to download their app. This was before the pandemic. Download their app so they could track their attendance and whether or not they were showing up to class late, whether they were spending enough time in places they're supposed to be spending time in, like the library and in social situations. Of course, they're going to use all of the information from that app that was meant for a totally different purpose to do things like contact tracing and monitoring their students. After a while, that kind of becomes normal. And if we think about it right now, I don't know if that's necessarily what we want to have as the norm, especially if it changes the way that students interact as part of their higher education, right? I know when I was a college student, we didn't have all of these things. And so thankfully, I was free to inquire and experiment and do ridiculous, silly things without it being captured. I could make my mistakes and it would be hopefully lost to history and time. That's no longer the case. Not only is there social media, but also your college is collecting a lot of information about you. So we want to be careful not to use this opportunity in an opportunistic way to put into place things that lead to mass surveillance across the board. And of course, during the pandemic, I think many other health issues have come to light or become more in the public view as we've gone on. So you all might remember this particular news item. This is from, I believe it's October of 2019, where we found out that a pretty popular medical algorithm that was used across the country at some very major hospital systems, when someone went in and actually looked at what the outcomes were based on the algorithm, they found out that Black patients were treated worse than everybody else. This was a huge deal, and racial bias, of course, is now a big topic of conversation in discussions around AI and the use of biased algorithms. So that was then, and now we have it applied to the COVID situation, where we can see that there's an actual impact. There is a reason why communities, Black communities and immigrant communities are much more affected by COVID-19 than others. And of course, I would encourage all of you to take a look at these sorts of news items and really make sure you understand them, because they have a real world impact and they're not okay. But thankfully, these are being discussed a little bit more now. I don't know how they'll be fixed, no doubt with more use of personal data. Actually, that is one of those places where there's a balance, right? The balance being, well, we need to collect a lot more information about things like demographics, income, those sorts of things, in order to serve those populations. But by collecting that information and not protecting it, we're actually causing harm to those populations. So what we want to do is to make sure that we are able to collect relevant demographic information, but we limit what we use that information for, and that we've really thought about ethical design in what we're doing for our programs and initiatives. Okay, so there's lots more privacy matters that happened with COVID-19. This was just to give you a taste of some of the things that we're talking about. Not only are they about the coronavirus itself, but the fallout around how entities are dealing with this. For example, with surveillance on college campuses. Then, of course, we had the protests against police practices, and that raised a whole other slew of privacy concerns. Starting with, of course, obviously, a renewed interest in not only just general police practices and brutality, but the use of technology by police and the use of data by police. So we saw relatively early on that Amazon banned police from using its facial recognition technology, only for 1 year. But that is now a conversation that is had, because the facial recognition technology, as many of you are very well familiar, is biased. It is developed by a certain demographic. It is primarily tested on a certain demographic, and so it misses or misidentifies other demographics rather readily at this point. It's improving, but it's not great yet. So this was one of the outcomes was for a year there was a moratorium, at least by Amazon, because police were using this technology quite a bit. Predictive policing has become a big topic of conversation, because predictive policing tries to use big data to guess which communities to monitor, to try to guess where things might go astray. And of course, it doesn't take much for us to see why that would be a problem and why that would lead to over-policing in some areas and not sufficient policing in other areas. We can talk about why this is at great lengths for hours and hours. I just wanted to put it on your radar so that you pay attention to it if you see it in the news or hear about it. And also just for you to engage with it. I think it's an important issue. Then we had questions around drone use and uses of military planes to monitor protesters. This was something that we talked about here in San Diego as well. Is it okay for your local police department to have drones that go over protesters and maybe using facial recognition technology, try to see who is who and try to, make some sort of either a decision or draw some sort of conclusion about who is there or what is happening in that place. This caused quite a bit of alarm in various cities because protesting is such an important part of our society, right? It's one of our important free speech values. So to have that be monitored caused a lot of alarm. Then bringing it a little bit closer to home, San Diego was one of the, was at the sort of the forefront of installing these smart streetlights a few years ago without any community input, without much transparency. And it was very, once it came to light, that was such a bad joke. Once it came to light that these smart streetlights were actually collecting very detailed and very high-res video of the surrounding area, and that the police department had access to those, then your privacy folks and your civil liberties folks were really very concerned. Because again, you're not just seeing the one criminal, you're also seeing me walking down the street. You're also seeing me interact with people. You're seeing people come and go out of stores, out of various places. You can draw a lot of conclusions about people and understand things about their lives that may not be anyone's business. And again, I want to make sure that, that we realize these things should not be looked at in isolation, right? Someone might say, well, if it helps catch one criminal, I'm okay with that. Okay, but let's look at the actual balance. Let's look at the rest of what it is capturing. It's capturing information about each and every single one of our comings and goings. And if you recall back to that other slide that shows all the other places that information about us are collected, you can see that you've just now added more, pixels to your digital Pegah, right? Your digital Pegah that is putting out information through all the apps she uses, all of the websites, all of her search history, her employment information, her college information. Now you're adding more information about her comings and goings, her location. So that information can be used for various purposes, including nefarious ones. I urge you, if you do live in San Diego, to pay attention to this particular issue, whichever side you fall on. I don't really care which side I do care which side you fall on, but you're welcome to fall on either side. But I do urge you to at least pay attention and be an informed member of the community. Because we also have had many conversations here in San Diego about police use of non-law enforcement tools. So things like going to Amazon and getting information about my what's going on inside my house. My Alexa can give you I don't have an Alexa, by the way, but Alexa can collect a lot of information about what's going on inside your home, and it can, if law enforcement wants access to that and they get access to it, they can glean a lot of information about my surroundings. Also things like DNA tests. Do they get access to, when I do the commercial ones, when I do Ancestry or 23andMe or what have you, do they get access to that? Do they get to use all these fancy new tools that are available for, off the shelf for commercial use? And so for that reason, the San Diego City Council just approved a privacy advisory commission that reviews all new, I think all new, uses of technology that the police department wants to use. I think this is a great privacy win, but frankly, there was not a lot of involvement from the community when the city council was considering this. This can have huge, huge impacts for us and the way the policing works in this city, right? When the city council was considering it, I think there were only like 40 people that attended that meeting and called in to express an opinion. So I don't mean to gripe. What I mean is there's very important stuff, even if you don't want or don't have the capacity or the time, frankly, to engage on the bigger international concern around privacy and data practices. We don't need to feel paralyzed, like we can't participate in anything. There's some real things that are happening in our own community that we can engage in. And not only in our own community, but on our own campus. I know many of you reached out to me with questions throughout the couple of years that I've been here about a variety of different things. I want to urge you to continue to do that, but pay attention to some of the new initiatives that are being announced, and feel free to ask questions about them. Feel free to say, what are you doing with my data? Is it protected? How is it protected? What rights do I have to it? You are welcome to ask those sorts of questions. And of course, I'm not going to belabor this point too much because I think we've heard enough about this in the news, but with the elections coming up, we're hearing more and more about the nefarious uses of things. Certainly things like micro-targeting. That's nothing that's new. It is the practice of gathering all of the information about you such that they have a pretty good profile of who you are and marketing a particular message just for you, or, you know, small subsets of people that kind of look alike, or I use look-alike, you know, not in the regular sense, but in the way that our data might look alike. So we can target very specific, nuanced messages that will, you know, hit a button on a Pegah, or hit a button on a whatever your name is, and target me for not only selling me things, but also for political messages, including misinformation campaigns. So we do have this being used for, you know, good or bad by the campaigns themselves. And I don't mean just presidential campaigns. I also mean campaigns around things like climate change, gun control, police practices, all of those sorts of things also use your information to do micro-targeting to you online and in a variety of different places. But of course, micro-targeting is not limited to good people or good purposes. It's also done by bad actors that will either target things like wrong information, bad information about how to vote by mail, for example, or target things to certain communities to lower their participation levels in the political process. That is all done by the use of your personal data, my friends. So please be careful and engage in the conversation. And of course, part of it we're doing to ourselves a little bit, right? We've put ourselves in our little information bubbles, in our social media bubbles, in everything being tailored to us. We certainly like having our Netflix or Apple news feed or what have you tailored to our tastes. But if we take that same approach to all of the information, all of the news that exists around us, then we do end up putting ourselves in a little bit in a significant bubble. And that can cause things like polarization and a belief in misinformation. So this is another thing that's a hot topic. Again, I'm not going to go too far into it, especially because I want to give us time to chit chat a little bit. But these are news things that are hot topics of the day. Pay attention to them. And then sometimes, amazingly, all of these things come together in one fabulous news story. And that is the face mask recognition program that actually several companies have put into place. But now there is a way to do scanning for face masks. And this is, of course, not only done using personal data about your particular features, it is used for enforcement purposes, and also by at least some other countries to allow you to participate in things like political efforts. So I liked this one. As soon as I saw it, I said, oh, this puts together all of the various things from the pandemic to protests to, participating in elections and politics. So take a look at this, fascinating stuff. Like I said, there are other companies that are doing similar things. Of course, I don't want this just to be doom and gloom. There are things that you can do. The most important thing, I think, is to raise awareness and to at least be knowledgeable about the matter. Even if there's not too much significant move, every person paying attention to the issue gets us a little bit closer to having a good, informed social conversation, hopefully at a national level, if not just at our university. So please get yourself trained, talk to people about this, ask me questions, ask yourselves questions, ask the administration, ask the apps that you use, ask the industries that you interact with questions about these things. In the very same vein, please stay involved in the issues. I know there's so much going on that sometimes we just say, this is not a hill I'm going to climb today. Sometimes it should be. Sometimes it's important enough. I know many of you, for example, reached out to me about the uses of your social security numbers for COVID purposes a few weeks ago. Thank you for that. Please reach out. It is absolutely within your right to ask those questions, including if you want to, direct them to me, and I will protect your confidentiality and raise them where they need to go for you without outing you for asking privacy questions. And I've said this already, contact me with anything that you need. I do have a privacy and COVID page. Some of you may have already been to it before. You probably have. It covers some of the more common questions that people have had around working in the pandemic. It has things about video conferencing and recording and that sort of thing. With recordings, I want to say this because this is primarily an IT crowd, and you all tend to be the ones that don't do this. If you are recording a session, we are in a two-party consent state. Please you have to tell people if you are recording them. So at the beginning of all your meetings that you're recording, you should tell people, we're recording, is everybody okay? You need to have everybody's consent before you record. Otherwise, it is not okay to record people. And I don't care that it has a little light at the top there that says you're recording. You have to get consent to record. Anyway, it has other information around, what to do with online delivery of things to consider from an HR perspective, and lots of other things. You can go there, privacy.ucsd.edu. And of course, this is at the end of every presentation. Please, if you have not been to a Privacy 101 workshop, go to the privacy.ucsd.edu website. Here's a list of them all the way through April. Sign up for those, and I do my best to try to make those engaging and fun. Please come to those. All right, here's my contact info, but I think I have 13 minutes to chit chat with you.
Perfect timing. Love the picture, by the way. I'm going to start with the questions that got the most thumbs up. This bad boy got 13 thumbs up.
Uh-oh.
It's Jessica asked, how was UCSD lucky enough to get Pegah as a privacy officer? And a number of people commented about how great you are, including our own Miguel Rodriguez. And then Dr. Hogarth also said that you were great too. Just wanted to bring that up before we dismiss it.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think there's a question there, really, but thank you all very, very much. That's very kind of you.
Hey, an anonymous attendee asked, when talking about buying and selling private data, most people can readily identify Facebook, Google, etc., but wouldn't be able to name companies like Equifax until they have a major data breach. Are there any other companies or entities trading in data that you would think people should know about?
Yes, so many. In fact, I'm going to actually, thinking back to that slide where I showed you the mess, somebody actually just yesterday called it the cesspool of internet marketing, digital marketing. because it really is a very, very complicated mix of different types of entities just sharing back and forth. I'm going to find a newer version of that, a more updated version of that, and share that with you all, because those are all the companies. Most people have never heard of them. You may have heard of Equifax, sure, but there are lots of others that if you heard, you'd be like, that doesn't even ring a bell to me. And yet they're the big players sort of in the background, in the shadows, without us knowing who they are, that have just hordes of information. And that's their business model, making money off of those. So let me find that and I will share it. Since it's an anonymous person, I'll just share it with this group, and they can, actually, I'll just update these slides with the latest and send it out.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Another question, you might have touched on this already. What are the concerns with privacy and contact tracing?
Sure, I touched on it a little bit earlier. It is collecting information about our comings and goings and our contacts. It gives a pretty good picture of our lives. We had, I think I already brought up concerns around DACA students in our LGBTQIA community. But we also, this was another place where things collided, the protest and COVID collided. As you all might remember earlier in the summer, there was a lot of talk about, are protests going to spread the virus? Should people not go? What do we tell them? Et cetera, et cetera. So if contact tracers were asking people about their activities in the last 2 weeks, some people were hesitant to say, yes, I went to a protest. In fact, some people were, the people that raised a lot of concerns were international students that said, this would not be looked at favorably by my government. Or are you going to report that I'm participating in this to the State Department? Am I going to get kicked out? Am I going to get discriminated against? Is there going to be some negative action that's taken against me because I participated in something that might not be viewed as favorably? So all of those communities were very concerned about contact tracing. Though, again, like I said, good contact tracing efforts and good contact tracing programs have excellent privacy protections. And should have excellent privacy protections, because you want people, just like you want people to be open and honest with their doctor, right? So that they can get the best advice that they can. You want people to be open and honest with their lawyer. You want people to be open and honest with contact tracing teams. For the same reason, you want your doctor to have pretty tight privacy controls. You want your lawyer to have pretty tight privacy control. You want your contact tracers to have pretty tight privacy controls. So it's an important one.
Makes sense. Another anonymous question. Is there a cause for concern over the expansion of big data, genomic technologies, and genetic privacy? That's in quotes, by the way.
Maybe it would help me to see it.
Can
you read it again? Sorry.
Is there a cause for concern over the expansion of big data, genomic technologies, and genetic privacy?
I don't want to raise unnecessary alarms talking about technology generally, even things around genomics. I will say that any new technology that involves sensitive information should receive some scrutiny. Not only the technology itself, by the way, again, the entity doing using the technology. Who do they share with? Who do they not share with? How long do they keep information? What do they use the information for? All of those things, not only for genomic technologies, but for any number of other types of technologies, for AI, for regular old, like I said, regular old social media. All of those have cause for concern. If you have a particular technology that you want to flag, feel free to email or contact me in one of these ways. I'm happy to take a look.
Sounds good. Another question from an anonymous attendee. I wonder what the political implications are of our campus using Oracle, since Oracle's president just hosted a Trump fundraiser.
I'm not gonna delve too far into that question, anonymous attendee. I think Oracle is going to have some political stuff to step through for a number of reasons, right? They've been in the news a little bit in the past week, so they might be getting it from multiple sides. The TikTok deal is probably the big elephant in the room that might cause concern at various levels. We haven't seen it flow down to our campus yet from a political standpoint. If it does, I hope I'm not in the middle of it, but you never know.
Nice. So Kenny Lee asks, where can we find information regarding commitments UCSD is making as a campus regarding data privacy, especially as it affects us directly?
Where can you find information about where
regarding
campus's commitments?
Yeah, UCSD's commitment.
Yeah. Okay. So UCSD, as many of you know, we fall under a great many privacy laws, things like FERPA and things like HIPAA, but also banking regulations, surprisingly. Things like license plate reader recognition, license plate reader regulations. We really do fall under almost every single privacy law that exists, with just a handful maybe don't apply to us. So we already are under sort of many regulators for that purpose. Also, the University of California has one of the stronger electronic communication policies that protects privacy in the industry. So most other universities don't have as tight of a privacy protective policy as we do. So those are just some of the things that apply to us. But as far as our commitments go, you can visit the Privacy Office website. It lists all of our guiding principles and what we're supposed to be doing and what all of you should consider doing in any sort of app, for example, that you're developing or initiative that you're participating in, or the committees that you sit on. So I would urge you to take a look at the website. It also gives very specific advice and guidance around the return to programs. So return to learn, return to campus, whatever we're calling those things now. Return to learn, I think I should stay on brand. Yeah. So for return to learn, there's a list of what we should do for those to be privacy protective.
Great, another anonymous question. Can you speak more to what constitutes consent for recording and how that applies to K through 12 and higher ed lessons and lectures?
Yeah, this is one of those early questions that we tackled, and there's a very distinct part on the Privacy Office website that addresses that. It tells you that anytime that you are recording any conversation, whether it's a phone conversation or a recorded video conversation or whatever, in California, you need to have everyone's consent. Now that can take various forms. The blurb on the website gives that to you. If you want to use that, you're welcome to. It sort of says, just FYI, the session's going to be recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, turn off your camera. That's not always feasible. It depends. For example, if you are in a K through 12 situation and the teacher needs to actually see the student, they can't turn off their camera. So there's wiggle room around what the actual consent language needs to say, but it is important to make sure everybody, A, is aware of it and that they consent to it at the beginning of the session. In the K through 12 context, that can get complicated because sometimes parents don't want their 10-year-old on a camera. And I urge you to have those conversations with the school district or your teachers or what have you. Sometimes they're actually quite open to that because frankly, school districts are not raised to be privacy. That's just not something that they're taught to do, you know, in this particular environment. So sometimes when people ask those questions, they say, oh, I didn't even think about that. Let me X, Y, and Z. Let me think about it, or whatever.
All right.
Oh, also, I believe, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong because you're on the call. I believe that Zoom still has, there's a capability that you can click that if you are recording, it will automatically have a pop-up, right? That says, this session is going to be recorded. Is that okay with you? Okay. You can use that as well, if that still exists. I believe it does. I don't see why it wouldn't. And that also is a good way to do it in case you have stragglers that show up late to your meetings. They'll also still get the thing and you won't miss them.
Yes, because one, rely on us to remember to ask. That's one thing. Two, remind or ask everybody that comes in. That's another thing that we would have to do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I tell people to, for example, put it in their syllabus. That's one way. You have advance notice, you're going to be recorded.
Okay.
Or put it in your meeting agenda. Or say it at the beginning. You know, so there are various ways of making sure everybody's aware.
Well, Pegah, I appreciate your time today. This actually.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. This concludes this presentation and the 2020 Campus Lisa webinar series. I'd like to thank Pegah again for sharing her time and insights with us today. I would also like to thank the Campus Lisa committee, and of course, thank you for attending. Please refer to campuslisa.ucsc.edu for more information. We hope to see everyone again next year. Have a great day.